we're out here today in New York City for the climate strike. As I understand, you and your fellow students have off today. Why are you guys out here? What does it mean for you to have off?
We don't have off. We're striking. That's the point of a strike.
Okay, so this wasn't like organized for you guys to have off?
No, it's not. We're cutting school. I'm probably gonna get detention for this, but it's worth it because like I don't want to fucking die when I'm 30 because the world's too hot.
Absolutely. So I see on your mask it says "Eat the Rich." Is that a part of the movement in one way or another?
It's more a part of my movement in general. It relates to this, but it's more about the fact that someone like Jeff Bezos or Bill Gates has enough money to last thousands of lifetimes where there are millions of people starving and dying, and that money could be used to help those people. And also, the people who have all these billions of dollars, thousands and hundreds of them have that money from burning fossil fuels and actively killing our fucking planet.
I see on your jawline it says abolish capitalism. Do you think capitalism is a root cause of climate change?
I do believe so, yes, because the fact that climate change is happening because mostly the burning of fossil fuels and other sources that are for profit.
Yeah. Do you consider like China capitalistic too? Because I know they...
No, that's you can call yourself something that doesn't make you it, you know? North Korea is not a democracy, even though it's called.
So China is or isn't capitalist?
It is
capitalist.
Yes.
So what percent of the world's CO2 emissions do you think the U.S. contributes year over year?
The U.S. contributes. I can't. It's somewhere between like 15, something like that.
Yeah,
it's around there.
So even if we get to zero, we need to get these other countries on board to join us, right? So
yes.
how do we influence those other countries that are industrializing now, India, China, to hop on board with us too?
Because most of the corporations over there are corporations like Apple and American corporations doing emissions overseas. And just because they're in another country doesn't mean they should have the right to break American laws.
So like we're responsible for China and India's emissions too?
Most of them, yeah. It's companies like Apple, companies like that have their factories in China, car companies, you know, General Motors, all that, have their factories overseas where there's less regulations. It's the same reason they're able to get away with underpaid, overworked child labor, because there aren't those regulations overseas.
Many people in the movement say that we have 10 years left. Some people say 12, some people say less. How much time do you think we have left to address this issue, or we're in real deep crap?
At the most, maybe 20 years. All I can say is this. The people who are telling us that we have time and that we should just chill the fuck out are not scientists. They're politicians interested in protecting the profit of the ruling class. The people who are telling us we don't have time are scientists. It's almost the entire scientific community is telling us this, and I trust them a fuck ton more than I trust politicians.
Some students were taking an oath not to have children because they said it's immoral because the planet's going to shit. What do you think about that? Would you take an oath like that?
I completely agree with that. Until we create a world that's going to be livable for a child's entire life, it's incredibly cruel to have children at this point in time. I don't want to have a kid and they're going to die at 12 because
You're taking the oath?
Fucking desert.
You're taking the oath not to have kids? Last question, who do you want to see run in or beat Trump in 2020? Bernie bro?
Bernie.
Bernie bro. Anything else you wanted to mention?
No, that's about it.
Thank you so much for your time, bro.
No
I
problem.
appreciate it. Thank you. What'd you think? Not too
I
bad.
don't know.
A little bit. Oh, wait. I also see the all cops are pigs. Can you tell me about the cops are pigs?
It is because, so obviously not all cops abuse their power, not all cops shoot people. That's clear. But it's the fact that we have this broken, this immoral, this discriminate legal system. There isn't a draft for cops. Cops choose to go and enforce that system. They see this broken system we have, and they say, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna go voluntarily sign up to enforce that system.
Do you think all cops are bad?
Bad in what sense?
I mean bad in the sense that they're immoral.
Not all. It is not the what you do as a cop that makes it immoral. It is the choice to become a cop that makes it immoral.
So cops are bad if they choose to become. It's immoral to choose to become a cop.
Yes.
So even a black cop, it's more for a black person to become a cop.
You're choosing to enforce a system that criminalizes poverty, that criminalizes fucking plants, that criminalizes all this bullshit. The cops exist to protect the profit and the capital of the ruling class.
You don't think cops protect life and liberty and the laws in our society?
I do not, no.
So who would protect those laws if we didn't have the cops to?
We do, you know?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's the whole we keep us safe.
Absolutely, I agree. That's why, I mean, what do you think about the Second Amendment?
The Second Amendment's been very much abused and twisted. It's about having a well-kept militia. It doesn't just mean you can own an assault rifle.
So we should keep ourselves safe, but not with firearms in the Second Amendment.
There should be greater regulations. There's a whole gray area to talk about there.
I mean, if we're not going to have cops, though, then if we had firearms, I'd be more like, yeah, I'm down for it.
Yes,
but if we don't have...
more the fact that we have cops and there's a lot of abuse in the system and people who blatantly misunderstand what the Second Amendment is for. Okay. It's not so you can have a gun to defend your house. It's so you can have a well-regulated militia in the event of government overstepping.
Do you know what the Second Amendment says? Could you recite it for me?
I cannot recite it word for word, no.
So it's
I
necessary,
can give you the gist of it,
necessary for the security of the free state, the right for the people to... All right, well, thank you so much for your time, bro. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Have a good one.
Thanks.
But I want to say to you, here are some of the things we're doing. I just introduced a plan called Clean Cars for America. Under my plan, not one new car that is sold will have an internal combustion engine by 2030. Every new car on the road will be electric or hydrogen by 2040. No internal combustion. And we are going to do that. Yes. Okay.
Green New Deal! Green New Deal! Green New Deal!
Here's a little answer you.
We're out here today in New York City for the climate strike. I don't know if students have school off or they're just choosing to cut school. So how are you out here and what's going on?
I'm choosing to cut school.
Yeah.
I think that if I don't have a future that I can possibly survive in, there's no point in going to class and learning something that's not going to help me in the future.
Absolutely. I know one of the leaders of the movement is Greta Thunberg. She kind of started off the climate strike thing in Europe. How do you guys feel about Greta being the leader here?
I think she's amazing, and I'm so proud of her for doing everything. I go to Beacon High School, so CJ goes to my school, and she's also one of the leaders in New York right now. And I think that's also amazing that we have so many youth coming up and rising up and being so powerful in what they do.
Some adults say like, hey, this is just some kids. Why should we listen to the youth? Like, what do they know? So what's your pitch test to why like adults should listen to the youth?
Well, we're inheriting the earth, so like this is going to be our problem. And so if they don't fix it, then we have to do it.
And what do you think?
It's also definitely something that they brought onto us. I mean, if you look at the history, before 9/11 occurred in New York, climate strikes were already happening, and it was something that people were talking about. But after 9/11, the rhetoric shifted to something that was anti-terrorism, which is also something that's very important to look at.
I know we had Al Gore with like the inconvenient truth. Nobody seemed to really heed Al Gore's warning. I don't know if you guys know who that is, but Al Gore ran against Bush.
Yeah.
So like, yeah, this has been a thing.
So it's not the first time, and because they stopped doing it, and now we're at this point where we have 10 years to really make these decisions and to get everything to this point so that we can have a viable future. We really need to get that going, and I think that a point is that you guys were kids once too, and you had ideas, and a lot of you lost your what's the word?
Childhood?
Future.
Your strength.
Yeah.
You
Like
lost your strength.
Childhood spark.
Yeah, and your imagination and your belief in what the future can be, and you fell into the system of capitalism and everything that's going on currently, and how our society has become very based on simply capitalism and who can get more money out of something.
I wanted to backpack on that point a little bit. I know many activists are blaming climate change and the pollution squarely on capitalism, and are talking about how socialism is really only the solution here. Do you believe that capitalism is responsible for climate change?
I believe that corrupt capitalism is a big position that has pushed this forward, because if you look at a lot of the ways that capitalism has changed, capitalism has now become this idea of not capitalism for the many, and where many people can gain money and have economic standings here, but it is for the 1% and only the top 1% really, and they're the ones who are also governing us now.
So do we have to angle off of capitalism to help address it? Or you said it was kind of like the crony capitalism that really is responsible for it. So that makes sense. What do you think about that? And is socialism necessary to kind of save the environment? Because that does feel like the underlying message here, and I don't know if they're compatible with one another. So.
Well, I mean, capitalism can be, I don't know.
I think, sorry, we go to school together. She's one of my friends is a freshman. So we've talked a lot about this in school, but a lot of what we talked about is democratic socialism and how that's something that falls in between both of them, and how that's something that could work to bring
I know Bernie calls himself a democratic socialist, just so we get our definitions right. What is democratic socialism?
Democratic socialism has a lot of definitions, but
Is it just socialism that was democratically elected?
No.
Okay.
Democratic socialism can have a lot of definitions, but for me, I consider myself a democratic socialist, and for me that means that I believe that capitalism needs to have certain cutoffs towards it. So yes, we need a free economy so that people can buy and sell things and that you can have ownership. However, that doesn't mean that, for an example, when we're selling medications, people should be dying because they can't afford it.
Absolutely.
And it doesn't mean that we should have weak social policies. So in Europe, you see a lot of places, perhaps they don't have as many super rich people in the top 1% isn't as forthright and ruling. However, they have a lot of more places where safety nets where people can fall back on.
Absolutely.
And that is something within also climate strikes and climate change, that is something that is so important that we look into, that we have that stance on it, that it's not capitalism for the gain of the few and for money, while a lot of people are getting hurt, and especially in other countries where we've only gained from by taking their money.
I had another youth-oriented question, because I saw some activists say that they are taking an oath not to have children because they're fearful of the future. They think we don't have much time left. So have you heard of students taking that oath? Would you guys take that oath? What do you think about that?
I don't know. I haven't really thought that far ahead, but like I'm personally very fearful and like scared for what the future has.
Still down to have kids though.
I haven't really like thought about that kind of aspect of life, but in the like far future, I think there will be, yeah, I guess so.
Oath to not have kids?
I think it really depends on what direction we go now. I think there are two directions we could go, or three directions. We could stay in the same path we are now, where I'm still open to have it so we can have more of a chance for a fighting future. But I'm also very open to adopting kids and or becoming a foster parent in those directions. And I think that just as much would be having my own kids count as that. So I think on that it depends. But if we go into a further direction where we continue going into this negative direction of not having any changes and not seeing enough results and not having a viable future, then I absolutely will not have kids.
I had one last question. I know a lot of people are placing a lot of the blame on the United States, but the United States is only responsible for around like 15 to 20% of the world's CO2 emissions. So even if the United States got to zero, we still have like 80 some odd percent out there. So how do we encourage other large polluters like China, like India, to follow suit? Because if they don't follow suit, it won't really matter.
Well, a lot of what's going on in China and Asia with the CO2 emissions, it comes from America because we buy the clothes and we ask them to make the clothes. So a lot of, for example, or production of things. So a lot of it actually doesn't maybe not happen on like American soil, but it is still something that's coming from our economic need and other countries' economic need.
And there's also the climate march in September, I believe. It was global. I mean, I don't know if you see the footage, but the footage is like there was people from every country like standing out and like, you know, protesting, including China. And so I think
like, do you think like Xi Jinping and the government and the communist government in China is going to listen to whatever the United States has to say about like climate change though, or even what their people say, because they have concentration camps in China. They are not listening to their citizens in China. So China needs to get on board for this to be a viable thing, right?
I think if nobody else were to, if people started to protest against China and not buy things from China anymore, things made in China, for example, that would have a big impact on.
So like Trump's doing like a trade war with China. Do you support that? Do you support any of what Trump's doing with that trade war?
I think what Trump is doing could
potentially help.
No, actually not really. I don't know much about this topic. I learned about it more last year, but I haven't been up to date on exactly that.
It's very important to get the world on board, because if they don't, then we're all kind of screwed.
I think, for an example, what you can see is that once we had Trump elected, a lot more hate came out from a lot of people, that you saw more people speaking against people of color and speaking against LGBTQ members in in smaller groups, but you also saw that in Europe, a lot of places were becoming more towards the right, not just because of Trump, but if we have an emphasis.
Maybe. Kind of, but just quickly in conclusion, was there anything else you guys wanted to mention?
I think that if the youth can lead by an example, and if everyone can truly unite and bring it together and not keep having the mentality of, oh, I don't matter in this, and if I don't do it, then someone else will. If everyone actually does their part, that we can make a big change.
What about you? Any last words?
I mean, I think the government was built on we the people, so they technically need to listen to us. And I think if enough people speak out about this, they will have to listen.
Absolutely. Thank you, ladies, so much for your time. Have a good one. Enjoy the strike. Thank you, guys. We're out here today in New York City protesting about climate change. I see you have a sign over here that says, "Nature has condemned greed." So the students have off today. It's the student strike. Can you tell me a little bit more about why you're out here, what it means for you to be out here?
I don't want to live through the end of the world. I prefer to avoid that. So I'm here to demand action on climate change. That's why I'm here. I call on the New York City government. We're here in front of City Hall. And I call on our national government to address climate change immediately. We're way behind on this. This should have happened 10, 20, 60 years ago.
What kind of things do you want to see the government do to really address this crisis? Because I know we've seen some different cities and state locales do different small things, like some people are banning plastic straws and things like that, but I don't know if those are the big ticket items. So what do you think we could really do to make a big dent in our CO2 emissions that we emit?
Well, we need to get away from using fossil fuels as I say, yesterday, 10 years ago. There's no time to waste. This has to be done. This can't be done by private individuals. This has to be done as a society.
And as I understand, one of the bigger influences on this march is Greta Thunberg. She was actually the first person to do the climate strike somewhere in Europe. So can you tell me a little bit more about Greta, how you guys feel about Greta here, and her being such a strong influence on the protest?
Yeah, Greta Thunberg is a great hero. She's one of the heroes of our times. I have a lot of respect for her. She's very young, but she's very well spoken. She's obviously very smart. And I applaud her, but also the millions of young people that are, like her, are making this happen. It's very, very sad that young people have to do this.
Following up on the idea of the young people being so involved, why should old people listen to young people? Young people often get called naive and stuff like that. So why should we look towards the young people for guidance? What do they know? We taught them everything they know. So why should we seek guidance from them?
I don't think we need guidance from young people. I think we need to wake up. And sometimes it takes a new generation to wake you up because they have the energy and the passion that sometimes we lose as we're beaten down by society, you know what I'm saying? So it takes a radical new generation to make it happen sometimes. But as I say, it's shame on adults.
Yeah. As I understand,
for not doing this right now.
As I understand, many people here are blaming capitalism for parts of the global warming issue. Do you also blame capitalism for global warming?
Yes, capitalism is at the root of this problem. Capitalism is a system that is based on exploitation and profit, and the only thing fundamentally to exploit is the earth. So that's what's happening, and that's why we're here now.
So would we need to move off of capitalism onto more of a socialistic society in order to address the problem, or can we not address it through capitalism?
Capitalism theoretically could maybe address it to some degree, but to actually solve this problem, we're going to need to fundamentally change society.
Absolutely. And we're also seeing countries like China emit a ton. I don't know if you consider China capitalistic, but we still have some societies like that contributing a bunch of CO2 year over year. I don't know what you want to call the USSR, but they were a very dirty country and emitting a lot of CO2 emissions year over year too. The US contributes around 15 to 20% of the CO2 emissions year over year. Even if the US went to zero, there's still 80 some odd percent out there. How do we convince these other countries to hop on board to address the problem?
I don't think we're going to address it, and I don't think they're going to address it. I think it's going to get much worse before anybody really does anything.
And then in the 10-year benchmark, do you think that's when shit's going to really hit the fan? Because I know we talk about like our benchmark for how long we have. People say 10 years. Do you think we're really in trouble in 10 years?
I think we're screwed right now. I don't think it's 10 years. I think we should have done something truly significant on this issue many years ago.
I had one last question. Does nuclear energy have any role in the movement here?
From what I've read, we have all kinds of technology to solve this problem right now. We have every ability to solve this problem, and it doesn't need to involve dangerous nuclear energy.
You said does not?
We don't need nuclear energy. Nuclear energy, maybe, okay, but we have the solar and wind and other much safer forms of energy that could be scaled up.
You don't
right
think
now.
nuclear energy is safe in today's day and age? I know there's been things like Chernobyl, but those again are really long in the past. You don't think nuclear energy is viable and safe in today's day and age?
Fukushima was really recently.
Sure.
Nuclear energy is very dangerous.
Absolutely. Just quickly in conclusion, was there anything else you wanted to mention?
Everyone in New York City should be here right now.
Absolutely.
I don't know why they're not, but I'm glad to be here. And everyone in America should be active on this issue.
Thank you so much for your time, sir. I appreciate it. Have a good one. Thank you. We're out here today in New York City for the climate strike. So did you guys have off today, or are you guys striking and getting detention for getting the day off, or what's the deal out here?
Well, I'm missing classes, and I do have a large free, but I am choosing to sacrifice my education for our future.
Awesome. What do you think?
Yeah, we both go to Brooklyn Friends, so it's a private school. Thankfully, they're able to excuse our absences. But yeah, we're still missing class, making the decision to strike. And hopefully this is an action that will continue. We didn't have public schools off, so I think we've seen a little bit less of a turnout. But yeah, it's been really good to be out here.
I know one of the big inspirations for this rally and the strike is Greta Thunberg. She was the originator. She started doing it first somewhere in Europe. Can you tell me more about Greta Thunberg and what she means to the movement? Do you guys support her? Do you think she's become too much of the face of it? What do you think about her?
Well, I think she's a great example of just youth activism, and something that I didn't think that would be really possible is her like representation for the youth, and just being a young person and having that much power and having that much credibility is just something really amazing, and it kind of just drives the morale of the I think of the march.
Absolutely. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, Greta Thunberg's instilled the movement with a incredible degree of humility. I mean, I think because of her and because she was, at the forefront, she's been able to allow for leadership from people from all different sorts of communities, and it's really been clear that this is not her movement. She started it, but it's, the youth movement, and as a result, I think that she's allowed for leadership on so many different levels across the world. Yeah.
I know her included, her and some other activists have been blaming climate change squarely on capitalism. Do you guys think capitalism is the root cause of climate change? And then how would we address it if capitalism is actually the issue here?
Well, I think that it's more broad than just capitalism. I think it's there's so much that goes into it. Like there are wealthy people and wealthy companies that are abusing our climate, and political people who are forgetting about some actions we need to take for our climate. And so, but I think I'm not going for that much of radical views.
Yeah. Do you hear that though? Do you hear that from people in the march? And do you try to contest it, or?
I hear that, but personally, I am not joining that. But I do to some extent understand, because people are really anxious and they want change.
Yeah. What do you think?
I mean, capitalism definitely creates incentives for the exploitation of our climate. But at the same time, I think it's possible to have capitalism coexist with sustainability. I think that's where we're moving, but just not quickly enough. And that unless we're able to radically reform the way in which our capitalist system works in order to protect our environment, to protect our climate, we're going to see more and more environmental degradation.
Yeah. I know some activists are taking it to the extreme. They're saying, hey, we only have like 10 or 12 years left. Some people are taking an oath to not have children. Do you guys think that's a little bit extreme? Do you guys think the decade makes sense and we only have a decade left? What are your thoughts on that? Or maybe are we setting too much panic into our public for potentially political reasons?
I mean, I think it is scary, and a lot of people are, there are a lot of statistics out there that are claiming a lot of different things, a lot of different perspectives.
Are you going to take an oath not to have kids?
No, I don't think I will be doing that.
Why not?
Because I believe in our future, and I believe in, I have hope. So, I think I have actually never heard of that.
You've never heard of that? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Have you heard of that?
Yeah, I've heard of that, and I do think it's extreme. I think when people say things like we only have 10 years left, I mean, it's 10 years until we see an even more significant amount of environmental degradation. It's not that people shouldn't have kids. It's not that people shouldn't, have hope, because there is a lot to be hopeful for. It's just that the longer we wait, it's not going to spell out at this moment the end of humanity, but it's just going to spell out, lives lost in, natural disasters, people's livelihoods being taken away, in, diminishing crop yields. And these, people that are affected are disproportionately in Global South and indigenous communities. And so it's, again, easy for us to say, oh, that's too radical a stance.
When you say the Global South and indigenous communities, how are they affected differently by climate change? Right now it's been 1 or 2 degrees Celsius since the Industrial Revolution. So how has that affected the Global South differently?
Right. I mean, I think just because where they're positioned, the natural disasters are more pronounced in those areas. Also, there's a correlation between Global South countries and also the developing world, and the developing world is primarily more agricultural and relies on that for their for profit. So, and the they don't obviously have as much money, so when there's a disaster, they don't have infrastructure to protect themselves. So that creates, again, more refugees as a result. And so with every climate sort of effect that you see, it affects the entire world. It's just more pronounced in those communities, and indigenous communities in particular, because again, their livelihood is tied directly to the health of the environment. So if we lose the environment, they lose their way of living.
I had one last question for you guys. A lot of people blame climate change almost squarely on the United States. They say the United States contributes a ton of CO2 year over year. So I want to ask you guys, are you guys familiar with how much CO2 the U.S. contributes year over year as a percent compared to other countries in the world?
Yeah, I mean, I've heard. Yeah.
I mean, I'm not fairly familiar for exact numbers, but I am.
If it was low, would it change your mind on the U.S.'s role in any of this?
I mean, I think everybody has to, make a change, but some people who are in better, like some countries who are in better positions than others need to make more of a change because that's possible.
Yeah.
And for some countries, it's not possible.
Did you have a percent in mind? Because it looked like you did.
I think maybe like, my guess would be 10%, maybe.
It's a little bit higher,
a little
around
higher.
15.
10 to 15%. Yeah. I mean, I think China does pollute more, perhaps, yeah, I mean, less per capita than the United States does, but on a whole, they pollute more. I think, like my friend Logan was saying, like the fact that we have the potential and the capability to transition to, clean energy faster than China does means that we are more to blame than they are, even if they're polluting more than us at the moment. I think that every country, it's a collective action problem. So there isn't,
If the goal is net zero, though, within the decade, then we have to get like China and India on board. So how are we going to convince these countries to hop on board with us? Because again, if we get to zero, there's still the 85%, and it wouldn't matter. So China needs to hop on board. India does. So how do we convince those countries industrializing now, helping the status and the quality of life of their citizens now to hop on board? Because this needs to be a world plan, and that'll be the last question. So, do you have any thoughts? Or you seem like you were. More
lead by example. We need to commit.
What if they just don't follow?
I mean, well, we do need to commit to the guidelines set up in the Paris Accord, and that's what COP25.
Did you know that even though we withdrew from the Paris Accords, we reduced CO2 emissions, and other countries are like China are still in it and increasing emissions? So on paper it might help, but I just wanted to make that clear about the prior.
Yeah. I mean, I think that getting again passing more and more I guess progressive legislation like frameworks in the United Nations. I think developing technology so that it becomes more affordable for countries.
But do you think that's going to convince China? Because like China's locking up Muslims right now. They have concentration camps. The UN is condemning that, but it doesn't seem like China cares very much.
No, I can't say for sure. I mean, I'm not saying that the U.S. In any way has that sort of influence over China, but I think as the more countries shift towards sustainable, energies, like it will become like facilitate similar shifts in China, and also like once countries I think move in the direction of sustainable. I mean, you could see a sort of like embargoes, sanctions. It might not move there at the moment, but I think there's definitely there's potential for them. And for us to collectively, as a world, make this sort of change.
Nuclear energy have any role here? That'll be the final thing. Nuclear energy have any role?
I mean, yeah.
Totally, yeah.
Cool, awesome. Thank you guys so much. Just quickly in conclusion, anything else either of you want to mention?
I'm okay. Yeah.
Nothing. Thank you guys so much for your time. Very insightful. Thank you guys.
Hey guys, we got a big crowd coming through. You may want to.
You're part of the march. Oh, and that's the organizer. Gotcha.